Today we have a fantastic discussion, so I'm going to invite our two panelists to come up, please, and I'll share a little bit about them as they come up. So we have first Sindhu Menon. So Ms. Menon is new to the CIO role for the city of Raleigh, just joined us here in June. Very interesting time to get to Raleigh for the first time. Got a lot hotter, although you spent most of your career working in Texas, so what am I talking about? Did a lot of significant work in Toronto as well, but most recently was the CIO for the city of College Station, and we are just thrilled to have you here. We also have Secretary Jim Weaver, the Secretary and State CIO, so part of Governor Cooper's administration, heading up NCDIT. He has a really nice NCDIT like lapel pin. It's I noticed that, it was cool.
Oh.
I don't know how to get, I would like to get one of those.
We can make that happen.
Yeah, newer to the area as well, joining us in the last 9 months. Before that, serving in Washington State, and before that, 32 years in Pennsylvania, primarily in human services, but also as the CTO. So the first question, don't know if anyone told you, but now that you're here, you're gonna have to pick a local college team to support. So who is that gonna be, and why is NC State the correct answer? I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I do want to thank you both sincerely for being here for today's discussion about building smarter, more connected communities. We can talk about college teams later. But the first question, what does a smart community or a connected community mean to you and in your work? And Ms. Menon, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Connected communities, from my perspective, implies a lot of partnership at the government level, at various levels of government, federal, state, county, and city, and also a lot of partnership with public-private, and also reaching out, understanding the needs of the region, and building solutions through these partnerships that serve our community.
I love that. So a very partnership-focused response, and I think that's well represented in the way that this panel was designed. So bringing two wonderful CIOs together. Secretary Weaver, do you have a response to kind of that idea of partnership? Does that reflect the way that you're looking at it?
Are we debating? No.
Counterpoint.
No, I just want to add on to what Sindhu said. I mean, at the end of the day, residents come to government for services. They don't need to figure out at what level of government are those services being provided, whether it's state, county, or local. And we need to do a better job through collaboration, partnership, whatever the right words are, to make a more streamlined experience for our residents in our state and our businesses of our state and our tourists of the state as they engage in government services. While we provide a lot of services at the state level, let's be honest, the rubber hits the road at the local government level. That's where the majority of the services that a resident is engaging with on a day-to-day basis are occurring at. And as we were talking outside, local government probably has a higher trust factor as far as interaction goes and then at the state level. And that's because they can see on a day-to-day basis what local government provides. So how do we at the state level begin to work more collaboratively with our local government partners to streamline these efforts and get to better outcomes? And it was really exciting here because, again, I'm relatively new to North Carolina myself. I came in March, so I may have tenure over Sindhu a little bit, but Sindhu's bringing this energy forward and really has worked very hard to get us connected. When you just think here about Wake County, here at the state level with the city capital, with the county government, and then obviously with the city government. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and when we even communicated and talked a little bit initially after we first met, our top 5 list was probably about the same. The order maybe in the top 5 may have differed a little bit, but we were all focused on the same thing. So how do we more effectively work together to solve the problem once and not continue to solve it at a factor of 3 or higher? So, and then Dr. Glova, you have to come do some work at DIT, and I'll make sure you get a pin.
Thank you. Okay. As long as I know the pathway.
Pro bono, hopefully. I do have a limited budget.
The budget, right. Well, I do have some questions for you about the budget now that we have one. But I just want to highlight some of the things that you've said here. I love this idea that, for the people who are here, or even the tourists who come to visit, it doesn't matter as much where the service is or where the impact comes from, whether it was the local level or the state level. It's really that, that is there, that's built in. And the trust for the local government, there have been a lot of studies that show that people have more trust in local government than other levels. And some of it is, we see our elected officials in the grocery store. I might see Mayor Baldwin, in the grocery. Actually, we usually meet on Twitter. but still, I could see you at the grocery store. And so this idea that, it's more here, it's more where we are. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. But since you mentioned the budget, see, now I have to, I want to ask you for a little bit of an update. So as we work to build smart and connected communities and think about that work, now that we have a state budget in place, what are the initiatives, the programs that you have your eye on as far as making an impact for smart and connected communities in North Carolina?
I think the key word there is connected, and so obviously the word that we need to talk about is broadband. And how do we start addressing the digital divide that exists in our state? We know today that about 10% of our state's population, roughly 1.1 million households, are on the wrong side of the digital divide, lack access to any type of internet access, let alone high-speed internet access. And when we talk in the course of this conversation, high-speed internet access we're defining as 100 down and 20 up. And it's not the FCC definition of 25.3. I think we all experienced in 2020 that was woefully inadequate, but by the federal guidelines, that's acceptable. And we can do better here for North Carolinians. So as part of the budget actually I almost said finally got passed. I shouldn't say it that way. But the budget that was passed by the General Assembly and signed into law by Governor Cooper contained a little bit of almost $1 billion, around $970 million of which was ARP funding items. And American Rescue Plan, if I'm using acronyms, I apologize. So there's a number of programs that we're looking to move forward. And keep in mind, the governor was focused on 3 key areas. And I think I heard somebody say that the previous panel had a three-legged stool approach. So we'll go with that. We need accessibility. Accessibility to the infrastructure. We need to address affordability. And we also need to address literacy and enablement, which also includes education. And woven between that is the theme of equity. How do we do this in an equitable manner? Because at the end of the day, the governor's focused on a prosperous North Carolina, an educated North Carolina, a healthier North Carolina, and I don't know if I said educated or not, but a more educated North Carolina as well. And we've seen a plethora of businesses moving in, high-tech firms in particular, moving into the state of North Carolina. Almost every week there's major announcements. Just this week alone, Toyota and the battery manufacturer announcing a big deal here in North Carolina as well. And the reason they're coming here is because we have a workforce that's ready to work, that we have an infrastructure for them to plug into. And we cannot afford to leave 10% of North Carolina behind, or we're going to end up losing the ability to support these major industrial giants coming into our state to do some things. So with that in mind, we need to understand where we're at today on broadband. And so when I talk about the fact that we have the digital divide that exists in our state, as an example, subscriptions to internet, 76% of Caucasian households have that. That number drops down to 68% for Latino households. That number drops down to 64% for African American households. That number even drops down further to 57% for Native American households. We have to fix that inequity that exists. And so the governor has challenged us to, over the next 3 to 4 years, he is demanding 80% across all our racial subdivisions here in our state that will have access to high-speed internet capability. Furthermore, we also saw in 2020 and parts of 2021 here the impact on education with our children. So the other metric that the governor is really focused in on is 100% access for households with children. We cannot afford to let our children go by the wayside and not get a quality education just because they can't get to a brick and mortar location. So with that in mind, there's a number of programs that have come about. First and foremost is a continuation of the Great Grant Program, which is about if I remember correctly, $60–70 million that are going to be set aside to continue to do what the Great Grant Program was originally constructed. That's a more prescriptive program. There's about 12 evaluation points that are looked at as we look at that competitive model. The next program is $400 million set aside for what's called Continuing Access to Broadband, or the CAB program. That is a program that is now being established to work more harmoniously with our local partners. So the ability to partner with county and local governments to help cost share, to help get more competitive procurements in place to enable the broadband connections. We also have $100 million that was established for pole replacements. So as telecom providers, utility poles that are containing fiber, as those poles need to be replaced, there's a program where the vendor community can come back and get reimbursements for those pole replacements. So that's going to help us out tremendously. We also have $90 million identified for stopgap measures. Stopgap measures are going to be things like fixed wireless access. They're going to be leveraging low Earth orbiting satellites to establish that type of connectivity. But where those locations are, because our state's is rural, it's very geographically challenged, we're not going to be able to get fiber at all places, but we got to get accessibility to all places. So we're not ruling out anything out of our toolbox as far as technology goes to leverage the capabilities and to bring that connectivity to the households. And then finally, there's some dollars set aside for us to do some program administration here. So $15 million over the 4-year period to help administer these programs. And then last but not least is a $50 million set aside to start talking about digital literacy and enablement. And this is where working with partners like Cramden and others here in our state, the nonprofits that are doing phenomenal work in refurbishing equipment, getting equipment out the door to our low-income households, children in need, but also incorporating a training too and making folks aware of cyber and the nefarious bad actors that are out there today. Because what we cannot afford to do is get our remaining 10% connected and then watch them become victimized by bad actors on the internet. So we got to make sure that we're doing the utmost that we can on education as well for our children and for the adult household members to make sure they're doing the right things from an internet aspect. We're also looking at dig once policy. So again, as Department of Transportation is laying fiber, that is being made well known to our supplier community. So as that trench is there, they're able to go ahead and put their stuff in as well. So that's just some of the areas that we're looking at. The other component that's exciting is there's $1 million set aside to do mapping. Many of you in this room hopefully have taken our speed test, and that data is being fed into us continuously and is updated in the mapping exercise. But as we know, the FCC mapping was based on the census block data, and it can be a little bit misleading. It's like saying 2 out of 3 dentists surveyed, right? If you remember that, if you're old enough to remember those commercials with Trident gum. And we want to get to more granular level. We want to get down to the household level so we have an understanding as to what's occurring at the household level. Is there connectivity already at that house? If there is, why isn't that connectivity occurring? Is it an issue about affordability? I heard a gentleman, the previous panel talked about the EBB program, emergency broadband. That is now moving away and transitions to the ACP program, and the A is going to elude me now. Access, I forget what the A stands for, I'm sorry. But it's basically the next version of the emergency broadband benefit program. What it does, though, is it lowers the dollar amount from $50 that currently is offered in the emergency broadband benefit to $30. And I will tell you that we're a little concerned about that because the average cost, it seems, in North Carolina right now is around $37 for internet connectivity. So we want to make sure we're going to be meeting with the governor and talking about what are some options, how can we possibly backfill if we start seeing that folks are not connecting because of affordability issues, what can we do to help address that? Today we have over 313,000 households in North Carolina registered for the emergency broadband benefit. We're 6th in the nation. You can imagine the big 4 states, New York, California, Florida, and Texas are ahead of us, but the state of Ohio is ahead of us as well, significantly ahead of us as far as the number of folks registered. And interestingly enough, if Puerto Rico was a state, they would be ahead of us as well. Puerto Rico has about 390,000 households registered and within that territory. So we got more work to do there to try to make sure that those that are struggling to afford internet connectivity have the opportunity to do so through these programs. And then lastly, what I was starting to talk about was the mapping exercise as well. We are moving forward. The legislature did give us funding to go ahead and do our own mapping exercise. So that activity will be commencing next month. And we look forward to getting more defined maps and more accurate maps than what the FCC has provided.
That was great. Thank you for that overview and helping to make some of those budget numbers, some of those programs a little bit more real as we talk about it specifically through this lens of what we're going to be seeing across North Carolina. Ms. Menon, since we have you, I would love to hear, what does this mean at a city level as you think about Raleigh? What's the translation of some of these state programs as you plan for a city?
Sure. One of the primary reasons for this partnership, the desire to partner more, is because of all the programs that Secretary Weaver just highlighted. So we have connectivity and affordability as well as accessibility is on top of our charts when we try to, as a city, when we try to design and deliver solutions. So there are several projects in all the areas, transit, water department, all of those areas where we're looking at how do we make use of these programs and build on to the various accessibility issues that we're seeing across the region. We in Raleigh are in a good shape when it compares to many other cities and towns that Secretary Weaver referenced. We have great connectivity in a lot of areas, and then there are some areas where we lack connectivity.
Absolutely.
So our focus is generally on those kind of projects and helping those move along so that we are able to address this digital divide.
And we saw that in the last panel when we zoomed in on Raleigh. I mean, as Secretary Weaver was sharing some of those stats, I don't think that I would have known 5 years ago that a lot of that connectivity gap was happening right here in Raleigh. Places where you can stand and see a large high-rise with the name of a tech company on that you could be standing there and maybe be surrounded by people who don't have access. And yet in the last panel, we saw these pockets where 20% of the residents do not have access, at least 20%, and those were highlighted. So I think hearing about how we're addressing that here in the Raleigh area is, I think it's challenging because we know that we need to solve, but it's also inspirational to know that we have somebody who's kind of new in this role and bringing energy to that discussion. So thank you for telling us a little bit more about that. I do want to talk a little bit more about the digital divide. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how we're comparing to other states. You just did the rundown of where we're listed for one specific program, but as we think about broadband and connectivity overall, Secretary Weaver, if you could tell us a little bit more about how it compares to other states, given your experience, I think that would be kind of interesting because as we think about how we're doing as a state, I think knowing where we are in the order might be insightful.
Yeah, certainly. So first and foremost, I think we're the only state, to be honest, that has such a comprehensive plan that has recognized digital inequity as a theme. And so I do know that we've shared our comprehensive plan when the governor released that as far as what he was requesting. He actually requested $1.2 billion in use of ARP funding. 420 million of which was slated to go for the affordability piece to continue the good work that we saw that was going on with emergency broadband benefit. The legislature kept the door open on that, but they didn't fund that aspect because of the work that EBB was going on and now the transition to the corresponding ACP program. A lot of states aren't really looking at the digital inequity as far as for cross-racial subdivisions or along those themes. Many states, unlike here in North Carolina, broadband is kind of spattered between Department of Commerce. Some of it's in the governor's office, some of it's in, maybe associated with the IT agency as well. We're very fortunate here, and I'm very thankful to the governor for having the opportunity. He made it very clear that broadband was going to reside, and it was my #1 priority here in the state of North Carolina, and has given us full support in that. And so that was evident when we created the the Diversity and Inclusion Office as part of our broadband efforts. The first in the nation. It's something we're extremely proud of. We're currently in the process of hiring a director of that opening. I can't comment yet as to who that might be, but we're very hopeful that we'll be able to do something here at the end of the year and have a more formal announcement. But really what we're trying to do here with this program is really start bringing that, get involved more in the communities. Because at the end of the day, it's the local communities that are going to help out tremendously when we talk about some of these programs. So all the great work that we're going to try to do around literacy and enablement and getting devices out the door, there's still going to be places where folks need to go to ask questions, to get assistance. And we want to start doing that private-public partnership opportunities and start doing some more grassroots level actions to start addressing this and making sure that we're doing the right things at the right times to help our residents out here in our state to get to different outcomes. We know today, as an example, if you think about rural North Carolina and the agriculture industry, IoT, Internet of Things, you have soil sampling, you have husbandry, you have veterinarian services. These are all things that the internet provides a valuable access and relevant data back to continue to help the agriculture industry. When we think about telemedicine and telehealth, as we're seeing the shift away from more of the urban areas and folks are starting to move out more into the rural areas, healthcare systems are being stretched. And so if you're able to tap into more of an urban or metropolitan areas healthcare system and to get to different outcomes and not overwhelm a local healthcare system, that's huge for us here. And again, we need broadband and we need connectivity. And then also when we start talking about digital transformation here, and when we were talking earlier about connected communities and the work across all government, how do we start, you need connectivity to do anything in a digital world anymore. And what we need to do is not focus necessarily on what's traditionally been called last mile, and that's service to a brick and mortar location, but we need to figure out how do we get service to the last user. We're on these devices. We demand, we expect to be able to connect anywhere at any time where we're at, not necessarily have to go into a building and get connectivity. And so this is the type of stuff that I think we're trying to address here in the state of North Carolina and get to those outcomes. Again, get to that different educational experience for our children, get to that different educational experience for our post-secondary children as well. I was with a colleague in the University of Houston, and he was talking about the challenges they had in the University of Houston with internet connectivity in the city of Houston. So these problems are not just here in North Carolina, they're across the country. And the problem is just not just rural North Carolina, it's our urban areas as well. It's some of our suburban areas. And so when you look at the mapping exercises that are out there, to your point that you had mentioned, very clearly to start seeing where these pockets exist. And now how do we leverage that data to get to different outcomes? And I think that's the one thing that we're trying to bring forward here in our plan in the state of North Carolina is we really need to leverage data to make wise investments and decisions as to where best to target and get to those different outcomes that we need here in the state.
So great. And when you say leverage data, I want to start asking a little bit about open data and then the kind of connecting to cybersecurity, which I know are topics that we want to get to, but you both have now mentioned public and private partnerships. And when we talk about broadband in North Carolina and we talk about public and private partnerships, there's a little bit of messiness there. So just wanted to see if either of you minded sharing maybe some just big picture ideas about what you think that could look like in the future.
Sure. From a city of Raleigh perspective, and Secretary Weaver probably would agree that we have certain limitations on what kind of broadband services, we can partner on, or partnership not so much, but more on providing, become the provider of those services. So I've been in active discussions with multiple entities across, both from a private sector as well as public sector, to see how do we address those digital divides in those areas that I had referenced earlier, where we have this connectivity issues and accessibility issues. A lot of that has, for example, we've been talking with NC State universities to see what programs are in place, then MCNC, WRC. I've been talking to multiple, and some others who probably I'm not naming right now, but all of that to say that, how do we come up with a solution working together?
Yeah, comes back to that really a theme that came out of the first responses, this idea of partnership and not just in the having city, county, state government at the table, but this idea of partnerships, which also came up in the previous panel. I feel like there's so much that's being highlighted here. I mean, you mentioned the three-legged stool that Yvette Holmes brought up. She also brought up this idea of isolation and how that lack of access can lead to a lot of isolation. And Secretary Weaver, that was what you were mentioning there, that it's access to so many services when you limit that connectivity. So a lot of opportunity there. Okay, there's a lot more on that, and I hope that you are thinking of questions for these fantastic panelists as we get a little bit further. But before we get into there, I do have a couple more questions I want to ask about cybersecurity. Since we have you here, Ms. Menon, I want to ask, as the CIO of a city, how much of your bandwidth, if you'll excuse the pun, is taken up by cybersecurity concerns?
A lot.
More than 25/3 now.
Here we talk about the data, the connectivity, IoT. Along with that comes the risk.
Yeah.
And as the industry would agree, we have a huge shortage of cybersecurity professionals. So just making sure that the basic needs are met, that itself sometimes is a challenge. So that being said, so we have a cybersecurity practice at the city, and we are building on that. How do we prevent, detect, correct, and keep our operations from being impacted as a result of an incident? So that's pretty much the focus of the team. So along with that, we have also, this year, we have tried that internally to build our cybersecurity education program. And I believe a lot of that has to do with educating our community as well, and making sure they're aware of the various risks and the bad actors and the way they try to get hold of, the nice citizens.
Yeah.
So a lot of focus has been on building that education program as well. And we're trying to, we have some vacancies in our organization that we're trying to fill. So that is all to summarize that a lot of my time is spent on cybersecurity. And I know state has great programs, so I would pass it on to Secretary Weaver so he can highlight some of those.
Yeah, thank you, Sindhu. Cybersecurity is extremely important here in the state of North Carolina, and I do believe, once again, we're a national leader as far as the state holistic approach that's taken and working across all levels of government and critical infrastructure. Also pleased to say that in the state budget, for the first time ever, we received reoccurring funding through the General Assembly. So $7.5 million a year now is going to be there on a reoccurring basis for us to continue to move forward with cybersecurity activities. So prior to that, we probably spent about 2% of our overall budget on cyber, which was woefully inadequate. And so now we're starting to get the momentum that we need to move forward. But North Carolina is poised. We have what's called the Joint Cyber Task Force at the state level, which is comprised of not just state members, but also local government entities, university personnel, and probably most importantly, the men and women who serve in the National Guard here in North Carolina. And at any given time, we are funding 15 or 16 active duty National Guardsmen and women that are focused on working cyber and doing a lot of work in the local communities that are out there. So when we look at cybersecurity, we're looking at, like I said, a holistic state approach. We have all kinds of portfolio services to offer to our local government partners around vulnerability management, penetration testing, detection and response. And unfortunately, we've seen in the past year over 20 such incidents occur at local government levels where a county government or a local entity was hit either by malware, unfortunately ransomware, and some other types of activities that occurred that we were able to deploy our assets and go out there and work side by side with the local entity and, and forgive me for saying it this way, stopping the bleeding and more importantly, getting things mitigated and then getting them on a path of remediation. Nothing's more frustrating to us at the state level than we're out there, we're doing vulnerability assessments, and a partner that we're working with takes it and puts it in the filing cabinet like they checked a box. And then within a year later, they just got victimized by everything that was just highlighted on that vulnerability assessment. We want to make sure that as we're going out there and we're identifying the opportunities, that we're figuring out a way to help work with our local partners to start mitigating and remediating those things. In the past year, we conducted, for Next Gen 911, we went out to all our public service answering points, or PSAPs, if I use that terminology. And any network that was connecting with the Next Gen 911 network, we paid for at the state level through 911 funds a vulnerability assessment. And no matter if you were a Tier 3 county or a Tier 1 county, there was about 8 to 10 items that were seen very consistently as far as opportunities for exploitation across the entire state. And now that we know this information, now it's incumbent upon us to go figure out how do we sit here and work with our county partners and our local partners to get those exploitations mitigated and remediated. So that's something that's very high on my list as well. But I would encourage all of you at the local government level, please, please use the services we have. They're free. I say again, free, zero. We fund our National Guard members and the work that they're doing through my agency. So we want to make use of the talent we have here. And I'm telling you, we got some extremely talented people. We got on our bench, threat hunters from Vanguard, Bank of America. They're doing that for those large financial markets. They can do it for us here at the state government level as well. SAS, NetApp. We got smart people here in the RTP area that are part of our bench strength in the National Guard on cyber as well. So please avail yourselves to those opportunities. Now, we do hear from our local partners about what appears to be an endless supply of demands and things being thrusted upon them. And we understand that, and we see that at the state level too, as it comes from our federal partners. So we are working at a national association level to try to address that and start getting some more harmonization of federal regulations when it comes to cyber and the various audits that need to occur, as well as getting some modernization of those regulations. If anybody deals with Pub 1075 IRS data, there are some portions of that regulation that go back to the days of Watergate in 1972. The relevance of that regulation today in today's society, I don't know, but we're still held to that requirement. And then when we look at criminal justice data, or CJIS, interpretation, every state's allowed to do its own interpretation of CJIS, which I think is a shame, and we need to get to some standardization so we can start doing some things a little bit differently across the CJIS realm as well. So these are things that we have underway. But again, we're looking for your partnership. We're looking to be a good partner with you. This is not the state coming in to take over and save the day. Trust me, it is not. We want to partner with you, and we want to strengthen the entire state of North Carolina to get to better outcomes. So ask for your cooperation, and thank you for considering us.
That's great. So many things brought up there in the cybersecurity discussions for both of you that, awareness is one thing, but action remediation is something completely different, and thinking about support for that. Partnerships, again, coming up. I love the idea of talent, that we have talented people in this discussion. I'm going to use that to transition to the next topic. We have a lot of talented people, not just in the cybersecurity space, I would say, but also in just data in general. I know that I've seen representatives from NC Open Data, NC Open Pass, Open Raleigh Brigade, Jason Hibbets, I saw him earlier, if he's here and can be embarrassed and raise his hand. There are some great people who are leading these initiatives a lot of times in their free time to say, if there is open data, how can we as citizens, as a community, come together and use that and do things for good? And there have been some interesting projects that have come out of that. So I want to ask you both just about your perspective on open data and what changes or advancements you see maybe between now and the next 5 years with open data.
You want to go ahead first?
Sure. So my background has been very much data-oriented, so I can talk for quite some time when it comes to data. But keeping it short, open data, I believe it has a lot of power. So especially at the level where there is connectivity between the various levels of government, and I have seen that work in multiple places. We have here at City of Raleigh, our open data platform is an integration between Wake County as well as ours. So basically, folks don't have to go to different platforms to search for a data set. So that makes it much more easier, and I would think the more collaboration that happens in this particular field, the better services can be offered to the residents, and more solutions can be built upon that. So I'm a big advocate of open data, and also I'm a big advocate of privacy as well. So there is a fine line between the different categories. Not every data is open. So, and addressing those fine lines and making sure that more and more data sets are available for folks to either work on solution and or build decisions upon.
Absolutely, and in one place, like you mentioned, with what Raleigh currently has available through that portal. And then you mentioned a little bit of just that standardization so that it's all in a format, and that was something that you had mentioned, Secretary Weaver, is talking about cybersecurity, but what do you think? What's your perspective from open data?
Yeah, first and foremost, Monday we will have the state's first ever Chief Privacy Officer will be starting here in North Carolina, so I'm excited to have her come on board. Her name is Cherie Givens, and she brings a wealth of experience. And now that we will have a Chief Privacy Officer, now we can start to talk about what can the state do differently in the terms of open data. I'm honestly and shamefully hate to admit that I'm not aware of really any open data sets that the state does make available currently at this time. And when I look at prior life, as Sarah mentioned, back in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, We did have an office that was focused entirely on open data. We did do things like hackathons where we made data sets available. It wasn't to hack the data, but it was really to start taking these data sets and figuring out how could those data sets be used to solve various problems. One in particular that was really, and this is probably one that we all can relate to, is the opioid epidemic that existed. I mean, Governor Wolf, when he came into office in Pennsylvania, that was his first executive order, was naming the opioid epidemic as a state crisis, which allowed now, it knocked down barriers, and it started making all the different agencies have to work together to start focusing on the opioid epidemic. And in the hackathon that was done with these data sets that the Department of Health provided, it started showing us trends and unique opportunities. So as an example, we saw that the epidemic was not as significant in urban areas, but in rural areas, it was out of control. Which you wouldn't, I mean, but as you look at the data, then you sit there and you start thinking about, well, why is that? When you start listening to medical professionals and emergency room doctors expressing frustration that they would get a patient come into the ER, but the amount of time it took for them to find them a bed and arrange for transportation, the patient walked out of the ER and they lost that patient. Not in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense. And so these are the types of things that when you start looking at the real world problems, that these data sets started to allow for opportunities to start bringing, again, going back to that private-public partnerships, right? How do we start coming in and what can we start doing to solve these problems? You know, how does you leverage an Uber or a Lyft concept to get to the ER? How can we start making facilities that have beds available for drug and alcohol treatment aspects more readily available to doctors so they can link these two services together and get that patient to the help that they need as opposed to watching them walk out the emergency room door. And we could just go on and on with different examples of that. I'm sure one area here that folks in Raleigh would appreciate is traffic congestion.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, and as you start looking at that, and you know, as you're building these roads, what is that doing to flooding impacts? When you start thinking about a torrential downpour, things of that nature. There's just so many ways that this can be done. And, you know, as we making that data available, you know, the greatest people who can provide us additional data is the public as they're going out and about. And how does the public start inputting or injecting data sets into this available or this opportunity, whether you want to call it an open data portal, whatever the case may be. So I think there's a lot more that we can be doing in this area. So once Cherie gets on board here, I'm really going to be excited, and I'm sure we'll be in contact here with Sindhu, and how can we start doing some things here different in our own backyard in the city of Raleigh, leveraging state data sets, maybe some local data sets, and see what we can start doing, and then bringing in Wake County, and who knows where this could go.
Absolutely. That's so great. I love this. I don't know if Noah Otto and Tom Snyder are here. If we could have an open data, just do this again, but have our Chief Privacy Officer join us and do an open data one. This is just really exciting, and I think a lot of what you just mentioned is potential case studies when we see open data helping us to ask better questions. You know, why is it that we're seeing this difference, and what does that mean about the services we could provide or change? It's just exciting and fascinating, and there are projects going on right now to some of the topics that you mentioned about flooding as an example. I know Riot has led a big project on that in the past. You know, water doesn't care about city lines, right? And so as you think about sharing that data and helping it, you know, different communities to understand what's happening during a hurricane and when there's flooding, it's really important. Okay, we need to have some time for questions because I understand that you might have some questions for our panelists. So I'm going to move us to our lightning round here. I'm going to ask each of you just a quick final question. If you could make one New Year's resolution or holiday wish related to your role as a CIO for 2022 for our community, what would it be?
Well, that's easy for me. I'll jump in on that one. That's get North Carolina connected.
North Carolina connected, yeah, I love it.
We need to do that. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. We need North Carolina connected. We need to continue to make this state the great state that it is, and broadband's a key component of that.
I love that. And I'll just highlight, I think that this discussion has done such a great job of emphasizing broadband as infrastructure, almost without us even directly calling it out. Throughout this entire discussion, broadband was treated as an infrastructure, and as it has been, of course, in so much legislation at many different levels, but just want to highlight that. Thank you for that.
I don't think I would have disagreed on that, but connected, and I would say accessible as well, I would add. accessibility to it.
Yeah, lovely. Well, before we move on to questions, can you just join me in thanking these panelists? Thank you so much to both of you for being here today and sharing your insights. I do want to move on to questions, so if you have a question for these panelists, I'd invite you to ask. I'm real blinded, so Tom, you'll have to tell me if somebody has one. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Steve Rao. I serve as a city council member of the town of Morrisville, and I chair our IT initiatives. I want to thank Secretary Weaver for being here and for all his service, and Sindhu Menon for coming from Texas. I just have an observation I want to share and then sort of get your feedback. Just this week, we were with Governor Cooper at the Clean Tech Awards, where he was given the Clean Tech Champion Award, and the town of Morrisville won an innovation award for our Connected Park initiative. And yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I just want to make an observation, and then I have a question in here, but just real quickly. So as someone that leads our smart city initiatives, you know, to me, what I learned from this entire experience, and I really want to give a shout out to our CIO, Rick Ralph, and our team, is we didn't know where to begin, like many cities. And we came in, we did an assessment, identified our problems based on our strategic plan, and then put together quick wins. So one was the parks, the other one is a solar array guiding our sustainability initiatives in our Fire Station 1. The greatest achievement for me was the smart shuttle. And so like my 16-year-old son today, to go to the park, he's going to use our smart shuttle in Morrisville with an app where the shuttle comes and gets him near where we live, takes him to the park, and then we'll take him back so he's in time for dinner because he's getting his learner's permit. The point I'm trying to make is that it's so amazing. For me, what I learned from this experience is smart cities is all about enhancing the quality of life for citizens, providing operational efficiencies, right? So my question is this. Tom Snyder and NC Riot's doing a great job with, you know, how they're bringing cities in to do collaboration. But what can we do, like on issues like data, stormwater? What can we do better as a state to help accelerate more cities joining on board to get these quick wins, so that as Secretary Weaver is getting us the funding for broadband, and the governor and Sindhu Menon's doing all this stuff in Raleigh, that we can have more cities enjoying this. And I'm willing to help you as an elected official. I'm beginning my 4th term next week, so I'm going to start beginning a smart city tour where I'm going to go around the state and the county and start talking to cities. So I just want to get your feedback on how we can work together to do that. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll jump in there, and again, not necessarily having the city experience, but I would, you know, your approach was spot on. Start small, don't try to boil the ocean, get some successes, and more importantly, I think share those successes, because once it's done, the hard part is getting it done the first time. It's very easy to start replicating that. And as we're aware of what those successes are, there are plenty of partners out there, especially when it comes to smart cities, who would love to get involved and engaged and help move that forward. And they're not necessarily telecom suppliers either. You got a number of technology vendors out there too who can help us out in moving forward with some of these initiatives. So as you're finding success in your efforts, share it. You know, james.weaver@nc.gov, share it with me. I will do what I can to try to connect folks together and to continue to help proliferate your success stories, and other entities can benefit from as well. Sindhu?
Yeah, some of the things that we are doing here at the city is all the solutions that we look for, we try to think from the connectivity, smart city perspective as well. You know, what can we do in order for us to make it more accessible as well as easy for the folks to use, for our residents to use. As we also look at, you know, how does that data benefit us in terms of making decisions. So I think to answer your question from a city perspective, I would say including that as a part of the culture would help us move the cities forward in that path.
That's a great answer.
Oh, okay, thank you, sorry. Again, excellent event, and thank you, Secretary Weaver and Ms. Menon. I'm a federal NTIA broadband grant judge, and I've been looking at so many different applications. Does the state have a formal effort to try and mobilize, because the states are going to get, you know, this first tranche of $100 million, and then they'll have to compete for the rest. So that's one question. And the second is, I heard Secretary Weaver say he had $90 million for fixed broadband, and I was
Fixed
curious-
wireless, fixed wireless.
Fixed wireless, but well,
And other stopgap measures, yes.
yeah, well, that was sort of where I was going with that. Is I consider some of the new fixed wireless broadband. Period. So I was curious, what technologies are you looking at? Because some folks see it as a stopgap. And as a federal judge, I'm telling you, I'm awarding money to people that are including the fixed broadband, fixed wireless in the rural areas, because that's the most economic way to get broadband to the consumers. And you can get the 100 by 20 on the new technologies. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me try to tackle your first question as far as the funding that would be available under the infrastructure IIJA. We're taking a look at that right now to see and try to figure out, how much of that money would be coming to North Carolina, and then B, what are the things that we need to do to make application for those funds. So I don't necessarily have all the answers for you on that one yet. The dollar amounts that I've been talking about right now are the culmination of funds between state and then the ARP funding that the state received that was allocated to us through the budgetary process. When we talk about 100 down and 20 up, that is not aspirational. I mean, I think that's a low bar for us to achieve, but it's tremendously better than 25.3. We should be talking about gig symmetrical, or whatever is going to be next. Who knows, in a year from now, that's probably going to be 5 gig or whatever the number is going to be. So we don't know yet what that lunar shot's going to be. You know, when Kennedy said we're going to the moon, we didn't get there tomorrow. It took a while for us to get there, and so I'm not sure what that end state's going to look like yet, but we definitely want to at least get 100 down, 20 up for all of the North Carolina. And so when we talk about the $90 million for stopgap measure, ideally we love to get fiber everywhere. We just know that's not practical, and fixed wireless is going to have to come in play. As I said earlier, low Earth orbiting satellites is very much an option, and should AW or Amazon start to get into the market as well and start bringing some additional competition to SpaceX, that pricing, coverage, some of those things, start becoming more of a commodity than what it is today. But we also got to be concerned about the fact that we don't want to necessarily take out our communications if one of those large hurricanes sits over North Carolina and spends a couple of days over us. Just think of the disruption that would have to our communications to our communities. So we want to try to get as much fiber as we can, but we are very much looking at fixed wireless and any other type of technology that's there as well. I know there's a number of suppliers who would love to do more smart city stuff, especially when we talk about Southeast Raleigh as an example, and some of the things that an AT&T or a T-Mobile or somebody along those Verizon could come in and help us out and start addressing some of the more urban areas as well. So again, everything's on the table. We just recognize the fact that fiber is not the answer for everywhere. We know that we're geographically challenged, and we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to provide connectivity to all areas of the state.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a judge, and God help you.
All right, so yeah, I'm normally using that mic. I'm going to take this one for one chance. I really like the vision and a lot of the programs and things that are going forward. Absolutely believe that broadband is not just critical infrastructure. It really is a basic human right at this point. In the same way that we think of clean water, we think of electricity. No one will move their family or start a business somewhere that doesn't have this basic utility. We are still, unfortunately, at a disadvantage compared to many other states in that our municipalities can't build out that infrastructure. Is there anything kind of changing in the policy landscape to develop more public-private partnerships and not to feel like everything just needs to be provided by the private sector? Because as you know, through these plurality of technologies, it's not a technology challenge, right? We have broadband in orbit. We can put broadband on the moon. It's really a business model challenge, and can we bring more creativity into alternative business models?
So as you're aware, the General Assembly, the legislation that's in place right now does not align to some of the concepts you just mentioned there. And that didn't change in the session that just concluded with the budget signing. I will tell you, though, at the federal level, as part of IIJA, like the 100 the money that was referenced by the gentleman in the back, that is one of the areas that is being that's being called out is that you have to allow for those types of opportunities if you're using that funding specifically. So again, as we're looking at what does everything mean, what comes with that funding, what are the requirements, does that have to get appropriated to us by the General Assembly? Does the General Assembly, is there any actions they're going to take? Are they going to remain with the current posture that they have? Those are unknowns yet for us. We'll cross that bridge as we move forward, but we're hopeful that, again, this is a once-in-a-lifetime generational opportunity for us. This is our moment to shine and to make things happen and be a difference maker. And I don't think anybody, regardless of a political affiliation, wants to squander this opportunity. So I think we're excited about what it brings to us, what it means for us. I'm a resident too. I get frustrated in the morning. I'm usually an early riser, military background. So come 6 a.m., I can start seeing in the apartment complex my bandwidth start to get throttled. I can start seeing some latency and different things. Yet when I do the speed test, I'm 240 down and 20 up, which a lot of people across the state of North Carolina would just die for that, right? They would love that. And I'm complaining about it, and I feel bad about it when I do complain. But, I mean, we can see it here, on an ongoing basis. So we're going to make the most of the opportunity we have in front of us. But like I said, there are some things that current North Carolina law allows for and current things that it does not allow for. And we'll have to see what that federal dollars and what may have to be changed to allow for us to use those funds.
Great. Do we have time for one more question? All right. I think we have, yep.
Anybody other than Mark? No. Hi, Mark.
All right. Mark Swan. I report to Sindhu, so I'll pick on you. Pick on Secretary Weaver. It's good for job performance. But my question is related not so much to about you talked about the methods of extending broadband or the tools. How have you thought about what entities you would work through? Is this something like a DOT model where it's, go out and do these contracts to do these trenches and cable, or do you see like Southeast Raleigh Promise is a charity option, or there's Raleigh ourselves where, say here's a grant Raleigh or here's a grant Southeast Raleigh Promise, go put fiber in the ground there and we'll turn that over to whoever wants to lease it.
Yeah, so we're looking at a competitive procurement process because, again, at the end of the day, we are government, and that's the type of stuff that we have to do. I think the difference here, though, and what we're looking moving forward is that the winners of those opportunities, they're not getting the money up front. It's basically a reimbursement of their costs. So they're going to have to demonstrate something got done, here's my expense, and we'll reimburse for that expense. But through the competition efforts, we'll have that money set aside for that effort as they have it defined. So I think the original great grant program was we gave money up front, and in some cases we had some good success. In other cases, we had some issues, and we're having to go back and try to get money. This time going forward, we want to make sure that the money's going for what was its intended purposes, if you will, and that a supplier is actually providing and demonstrating they have something done, and then we'll reimburse the effort. I know Mark was getting up before I teased him. Come on, Mark.
I can take it's a long-winded question. I'll try and make it as short as I can. You both talked about partnerships. As you know, I'm Mark Hoyt, NC State, for those of you who don't know me. NC State's a big partner and loves the partnership idea. But there's a last mile problem, and not a last mile connectivity problem, a last mile people problem. And that's what the Raleigh Promise and some of the other groups are doing. They're helping close that gap. But there are also groups inside each of your organizations that do things out in the distances and are not enveloped and not part of your own partnerships. So how do you change some of that dynamic and bring all those groups together in order to do that last outreach to balance those three legs of the stool? Sorry, hard question for the closing.
So I think that was directed to you, Sindhu. No. Mark, I mean, I don't have the answers for that. Again, I would encourage you have ideas, come to us, and we'll sit down. I mean, we need to engage everybody in this. It's going to take a village to make this happen. It's not going to just be a few people. And I don't know how else to actually respond to that. It's a fair question to ask.
And I will bring up, there was I think it was Brent Sloan of LifeScale, had a great term for us in an earlier panel of civic inclusion, and just this idea that it is not just the partnerships that are coming from a certain level and kind of being brought down, but that, it involves everyone. And I think broadband is a crucial space for that, where there are hurdles where, as an everyday citizen, I don't feel like I can go dig a trench and put down any fiber, but there are things that I can do. And certainly we had high school students here talking about the roles that they have as ambassadors on some of these issues. So for me, I've gotten a lot of inspiration out of this panel, and it's hard not to think about where else can I be involved as a citizen, as a business owner, as a parent in these areas, and how can I make sure to amplify my support for the kind of partnerships, and even frankly for the kind of business models that Tom was asking a question. How can I do a better job of amplifying some of that? So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to voice that it's been happening all day, these great conversations to try to answer that very crucial question. Yeah. Cindy, did you have anything else on that one? That was a good one.
Well, I'm on the same page as Secretary Weaver here as well. We are open to those discussions. We have to figure it out, and I don't believe the solution is, it has been found yet. How do you build these partnerships and bring them forward? Mark, I would really love to talk about it as I discuss with others.
Yeah, and we already have our plan for our next panel. We're going to do the open data panel next. Yeah. Okay. We are at time. Unfortunately, I feel like I could keep talking to these two individuals all day. I want to thank you all for being such a great audience and listening to two fantastic CIOs. As a proud North Carolina resident, I want to say to both of you, welcome to our state. I'm so glad that you're here. I hope you enjoy a wonderful first holiday as North Carolinians. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.